It was another hour and a half before I finished cleaning the floor in the dining room and the kitchen and started on Nia's booth. I threw the plate away that Misha's head had been sitting on, as I didn't really want to risk having something served back to me on it, even if I would have run it through the dishwasher 14 times. The Sprite had dried in Nia's water goblet, and the sugar had caked onto the bottom of it, so I threw that away too. The syrup in the dispenser had congealed. Having left it in the cooler, how it had gotten back onto the table, I had no idea. I wasn't entirely sure that there had just been strawberry juice and sugar in that syrup anymore, knowing who used it for her waffles, so it followed the rest into the trash. Between the two of us, we'd finished the bottle of vodka, and I threw it away also. I had more than just a good buzz going by the time we were done, but Becca seemed largely unfazed. She finished the counting and the calculations, tore the long slip of paper loose from the adding machine and put it back into the duffel bag. The final calculation read $176,547. As I watched, she wrote up 27 different deposit slips from various banks across the boroughs and sent me to the front of the restaurant to grab some doggy bags from the register. She made a few notes in the account book and divided the money up with the slips in the plastic bags, tying them shut and putting them back inside the duffel bag. I ain't entirely sure you should have been drinking while doing that, Bex. I was slurring more than just a little bit when I smoke, so I weaved my way over to the coffee machine and poured 2 cups, carrying the other back to Becca. She took it from me, black and with no sugar as was her habit, and started sipping at it. That's a hell of a lot of money to possibly make a mistake with. Hell, that's more money than I've made in my entire life. Jesus, you broke fuck. This is just for the week, and it was a slow goddamned week. Besides, I could do this shit in my sleep. I've been Cookies Jimmy's book since I was 12. He figured out pretty quick my dad couldn't be relied on. And you know, I ain't that drunk. I got a strong constitution. Per capita, the Korean population consumes more alcohol than the entire country of Russia does, you know. Today I learned, I quipped, and she laughed. I diluted the industrial bleach in the bucket according to the instructions on the back, after I had poured the bloody water down the drain at the mop station and filled it with a gallon of scalding water. I coated the table and the booth with the dilution after I had scrubbed the last bit of blood off the tabletop. The 2 spots on the dining room floor got covered next, and the one in the kitchen. I threw the rags away, poured the bleach water down the drain to rinse out the last bit of bloody residue, and returned to Becca's booth to nurse my coffee while the dilution sat for the required 20 minutes. The bottle had only said 10, but I figured you could never be too safe where blood was concerned. Becca switched her phone screen on and selected asshole from the top of her contacts list. She put it on speaker and the call was answered on the second ring. Yeah? It was Jimmy's voice on the other end. Deposit's done. Just under 200 grand. I'm upstairs and I want this goddamn money off my hands, you fucking wop. All right, hold your horse. She hung up the call before he'd finished speaking with a smug look on her face and took another sip of her coffee. Becca had a set of steel balls, I'd give her that much. Jimmy and Nia came up about 10 minutes later, both dressed now. Jimmy looked over the account book and compared it to the adding machine paper and signed an X in the verification box before he took the black duffel bag and disappeared into the back again. Nia stood beside Becca and reached down to caress her face. Becca looked up and smiled at her, covering Nia's hand with hers. Buongiorno, Mama. Nia bent down and they kissed each other's cheeks. You smell sad, Carmia. Tell me, who do I need to kill? I snorted into my coffee, scalding liquid filling my sinuses, inhaled half a gulp in reflex and sputtered and coughed until I got the hot liquid out of my lungs and nose, reaching blindly for the napkins in the dispenser on the table. Becca shot a glance at me but didn't say anything as she looked back up to Bianchi. It's no big deal, Ma. It is what it is. I'm a big girl. I'll be fine. I can handle my shit. Che bella bambina, stai crescendo così in fretta, Nia said fondly. What a beautiful baby girl. You're growing up so fast. How are you on your medicine? Last shot is tomorrow. Give me a few days, my treasure, and I will get you more. I'd finally managed to stop myself from drowning, and I noticed with a sinking feeling that Bianchi had turned her attention to me. I'd like to go out tonight. Here is my address. Pick me up at 10 p.m. She handed me a little slip of paper with a Stillwell Avenue address written on it in handwriting that looked more like calligraphy than a quick-jotted note. I glanced at Becca, and she raised an eyebrow at me. Don't be surprised if you end up on the rotation, she'd said. Guess she'd been right. Yes, ma'am, I answered quietly. Ania grabbed the tip of my chin with cold fingers and gave it a little shake. Sweet boy, she purred, and then walked into the back herself. Jimmy passed by her and counted out $2,000 to Becca and another $1,000 for me. You did a good job, Tone. You can come in when you wake up in the morning. It's going to be a late night. All hell is going to break loose when that storm hits in 2 days. They're calling for 36 inches and 45-mile-an-hour winds. Set to be a record breaker, so tonight's your best option. She'll want to go to Sapphire's Times Square and make sure they cook her steak right this time. See it on both sides. If it isn't bleeding when it comes out, send it back. He counted out to another $1,000 for me and handed it to me. For expenses, he said, and then handed me a car key. You do know how to drive, right? I nodded. Take my car. I don't want her on the train. Shit's a little hairy right now. Well, considering yesterday 2 members of the Ukrainian mob tried to cut her head off, I can kind of see his point. Gotcha, boss, I answered, and he left without another word. Sapphires? I asked Becca once we were alone again. It's a fancy strip club. A couple hundred horny dudes packed in one building, so a succubus all-you-can-eat buffet, basically. I looked into my coffee cup and finally put voice to what had been eating at me for the last few minutes. What did she mean by medicine, Becca? You sick or something? 'Cause I used to have a horse problem, and that's what I always called it, my medicine. And I can tell you, Becca, that's not shit you want to be messing around with. Jesus Christ, Tony, I'm not a junkie. I am sick. Or, I was. It's kind of in limbo at the moment. The fuck does that mean, Lee? Speak English. It's AML, asshole, she spat. Acute myeloid leukemia. I was diagnosed at 8 years old. They gave me 6 months to live, even with treatment. But the funny fucking thing about terminal blood cancer is it responds really goddamn well to once-weekly whole blood transfusions of the demonic variety. And it just so happens I know someone with a limitless source of what I need to keep the cancer in remission. I felt like an asshole. Jesus, Becca, I'm sorry. Just forget about it, Tony. I don't want your fucking apology. Becca switched on her phone again, dialing Rossi this time. Baby girl, he answered. Hey, Pops. We got a problem. The boiler's gone down in the building. It was 35 degrees in my living room when I left this morning. Jesus Christ, Becca, it's 20 outside now. Why didn't you call me earlier? 'Cause you're an old fuck, Rocco. You need your sleep. I'm gonna send the new guy over to help you out. Maybe you can liberate some of your stock of space heaters and electric blankets. Write it off as a charitable donation. Jesus Christ, was all Rossi said, and then hung up the phone. I waited for the cars to clear the avenue for just a moment and headed across the street and into Rossi's hardware. Rossi was in his usual uniform of khakis and a plain white button-down, but he'd already pulled his coat on. There was a U-boat in the middle of the store floor, and he was stacking it with a few electric heaters, electric blankets, boxes of hand warmer packets, propane tanks with heating units on top, carbon monoxide detectors, and kerosene heaters. I didn't wait to be told what to do. Pops might have been a nice old man, but he had a grim look of determination on his face that told me he could probably be damned nasty if he had a mind to be. There are 18 units in an apartment building. One's empty. The wiring is shit in that old place, and we're going to start a fire if there's a heater and electric blanket running in all 17. And the last thing those people need is to be homeless in the middle of a fucking blizzard, Rossi said, and I nodded and went to grab more of the kerosene heaters off the shelf. He grabbed 4 kerosene jugs and headed into the back, where I knew he had a single kerosene pump beside a propane tank for refilling bottles out behind the store. After I had counted out the correct number of heaters, I headed out the back door and grabbed the 2 kerosene jugs he had already filled, carried them inside, and set them on the end of the U-boat. He came back in with the last 2 a few minutes later, and then he held the door open for me while I pushed the U-boat through. He flipped the sign to closed on the door, and we made our way down the sidewalk. Rossi held the lobby door open as I pushed it inside. Start on the first floor. Start knocking doors and handing them out. I'm gonna go upstairs and start calling people down. Got it. I nodded, passed by the mailboxes in the center of the hallway, and headed to the left to start banging on doors. Maintenance was all I could think to yell at first. We got heaters for yous guys. The first apartment opened. It was a red-haired girl carrying a screaming baby in her arms. Her name was Katrina. The kid, Bobby, had a coat and a hat on, mittens covering his chubby little paws, but his tiny cherub cheeks showed livid red spots from the cold. Oh, thank God! God bless you! God bless you! She said in a rush, then rushed past me and started banging on the door of the apartment next door to hers. Dene! Open up! They brought us heaters! The man inside came out a few seconds later, bundled up just like Katrina was, and headed down the hall to the third and fourth apartment as Katrina had gone to the fifth. It took less than 5 minutes to distribute supplies through the first floor. Danny from 4A and Vic and Mina, the man and woman in 6A, each grabbed a heater and began carrying them up the stairs to the second floor. Tell them to close off the rest of the apartment. Put the heater in the living room and crack open a window if it's not electric. Anybody with kerosene or propane gets a detector, too. Carbon monoxide will kill you a hell of a lot faster than the cold will. I called after them. Fareed, the guy in 1C, waved to me as he came down the stairs. Hey, I'll keep handing these out. Old man upstairs says he needs you. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, and as I breached the hallway, I could hear Rossi knocking heavily on the door to 6C. Abre la puerta, abuela. Estamos aquí para ayudar. Hola, Mrs. Morales. I made my way down the hallway as quick as I could. She ain't answering, Rossi said to me. He pulled a little leather folder from his pocket and withdrew a set of lockpicks. The lock was open in a matter of seconds, and I followed Rossi inside as he called for the widow again. We found her in the hallway, lying face down on the floor. Her walker was overturned beside her. Rossi crouched down and pressed his fingers to her throat. Fuck me, he muttered. She's gone. Call it in. Rossi headed back downstairs to finish the distribution of the heaters. I told the dispatcher I had gone to check on my elderly neighbor because of the heating problem in our building. Her door had been unlocked, and I had found her collapsed in the hallway, not breathing. They sent a bus and 2 police cars, and they took my statement as the EMTs pronounced her dead and sent for the coroner's van. Don't feel bad, kid. Nothing you could have done for her. She's been dead at least 6 hours, since 2 or 3 this morning is my guess, cop tells me. Wasn't the cold that did it. I ain't a medical examiner, but from the look of the muscles in her face, my money's on a stroke. Lost my mom the same way. At least somebody found her early. It's the ones that nobody misses for a few days, a few weeks. Those are the real sad ones. You take care of each other, all right. It's only going to get colder. Rossi left a propane heater outside of my apartment. I did as I had told the others, closed my bedrooms and bathroom off, and hung a blanket over the kitchen doorway. I cracked open the window before I lit the heater on the tank and plugged in the electric blanket. I left my clothes and boots on and climbed under the blanket, wrapping my frigid hands around the warming packet. I jerked awake with a yelp as I heard a rattling at my window. Becca was outside on the fire escape, and for a long second I thought I was having another nightmare, because she was wearing a long black dress, and in the 6 months I had known Becca, I'd never seen her wear a dress once. On a Friday. Sunday, maybe, but never Friday. She knocked at the window again, and I crossed the room and lifted my window the rest of the way open to let her in, and slid it almost shut behind her. Jesus Christ, Bea, you scared the shit out of me. Sorry, she said weakly. Fucking cops are still clogging up the hallway, or would have knocked at your door. She looked distinctly unsettled. What happened? Mrs. Morales had a stroke last night. God damn, Becca whispered, and I noticed that one high-heel-clad foot was tapping out a nervous rhythm on my floor. What's going on, Becca? Why are you dressed like that? Tatiana just called me. Who? Tony's mom. She told me to dress for a funeral, and I don't know whose fucking funeral I'm going to. I don't want to go down there by myself. Tony, come with me, please. Go down where? Brighton, she answered. Brighton Beach. Jesus Christ. I got this sick fucking feeling, man. she grated out. She wasn't the only one. "You ain't got a suit, do you?" I did have a suit. One I hadn't worn since I was 16, but somehow it still mostly fit, if a bit tighter than I remembered. I had a strong sense of déjà vu, looking at myself in the black suit in the mirror. As I opened the bedroom door, I saw Becca barreling into my kitchen, and I heard the sound of her puking her guts up in my kitchen sink, and then the water running. She was pale and sweating as she stumbled back into the living room. "Vodka caught up to you, huh?" "I guess," she whispered, wiping at her mouth with the back of her hand. There was the ding of a notification from her phone. She unlocked her screen, took a long look at it, her frown only deepening. She stared at the wall afterwards. "Becca? Come on. I gotta stop by the bodega first." We headed down the street, and I stood just inside the front door of the bodega as Becca headed into the back of the store. She was gone for about 10 minutes before she barreled out of the back and headed out the front door. I had to stretch my stride to catch up to her. She was already at the platform when I finally caught up to her, and I hurriedly tapped my card on the Omni reader and headed through the turnstile, just as the train rolled to a stop. I sat myself down beside Becca as the train doors slid shut. Her face was ghostly white. You gonna throw up again, Bea?" She didn't answer me, but pulled a little plastic stick out of the pocket of her coat and held it out where I could see the 2 pink lines in the test window. "You're pregnant?" "I didn't think about it, you know. My cycles have never been regular, but my Fitbit said I was supposed to start my period today, and I ain't had one in like 3 months. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. Do you think I hurt it? By drinking? The baby?" She looked her age in that moment, just a scared teenage girl. "You been drinking a lot lately?" "No, not in months. Haven't felt the need to since..." She trailed off. "Since you and Anthony?" She nodded. "I mean, I'm pretty sure fetal alcohol syndrome takes more than just one time. I'm pretty sure you gotta drink regularly and for a while, you know." "I gotta get to the doctor," Becca muttered. "I got no idea what the transfusions are doing to the kid. You know, I think it's fine. Baby's got its own blood supply. The two don't mix." We took the L line down to the New York Aquarium, then got onto the Q line to take us to Brighton, and walked the rest of the way to Skovorodka, as the restaurant was called. There were 2 large placards outside of the restaurant, a dozen or more candles, 3 wreaths, and a pile of flowers in front of them. I could read it as we got closer. Out of respect for the Pavelko-Zabrowski family, we will remain closed to the public from 11 a.m. till 2 p.m. The second placard had 3 pictures on it, and I knew which 3 faces I was going to see there even before Becca began screaming. I'd never heard anyone scream like that outside of a movie, like the audio equivalent of pulling your lungs out through your throat. I caught her before she hit the ground, but I don't even think she realized I was there. There was a commotion inside of the restaurant, a blonde woman coming to the door. Igor, the last surviving Zabrowski brother, was just behind her. He'd probably been the one to put the slug in Jimmy's stomach yesterday, now that I thought of it. But he'd gotten away alive, unlike Mishu and Wojciech. There was a tall, dark-haired man behind him, and if physical resemblance was any indication, I would say that was Antony Zabrowski Sr. The woman, Tatiana, I guessed, exited the restaurant and headed straight to Becca. She gathered her away from me. I didn't understand much Russian. My vocabulary kind of peaked at privet and spasiba, but I could understand her tone just fine. Becca hung on to her, still wailing, her hands white-knuckled in Tatiana's morning black. I opened the door for them, and Tatiana somehow managed to maneuver Becca inside. I followed them, and she led her to a table in the back of the eatery. Igor stepped forward, and I offered my hand to him. I was surprised when he took it. "My condolences for your family's immense loss." "It ain't true, Mama, it ain't true. He's not dead, he's not. You're lying to me. Jesus Christ, tell me you're lying." I'd never heard Becca sound like that before. "Oh, Malinki, my sweet girl." It was another 15 minutes before Becca's convulsive sobs eased, each one tearing up out of her guts like she was vomiting razor blades. "What happened to him?" Becca finally asked. Murder, little one. But do not worry, they'll pay. They will all pay for what was taken from us. She pressed something into Becca's palm, closing her fingers around it. Becca looked down and opened her hand. It was an engagement ring. She balled her hand around it, banged her fist into her chest, and wailed again. I had a sudden flash of Anthony beating the bloody stump of his wrist into his chest in much the same way. I don't think I'm ever going to get those sounds out of my head, no matter how long I live. I think you ought to tell them, Becca, I spoke up eventually. They deserve to know. The look on her face said Becca had forgotten all about the little plastic test in her pocket. Her lips were pressed in a thin white line by her teeth. Becca grabbed Tatiana's hand and laid it over her still flat stomach. There was confusion on the woman's face, then disbelief, and then the barest bones of hope. I'm pregnant, Mama. Anthony is going to be a father. The funeral turned to a celebration after that. Becca was plied with food and me with drink. It wasn't entirely my concern for Anthony's family that had led me to push for the announcement of Becca's pregnancy. Carrying Anthony's child meant Becca was untouchable, and as long as I was with her, I was safe. Or, at least I thought I was. The vodka was wanting out, so I excused myself quietly to the restroom and went about my business. As I was washing my hands, the door opened, but I didn't bother to look up from the sink. It was a mistake. My vision exploded in white. My ears were ringing. When the world finally swam back into focus behind the shower of white sparks, I realized I was on the floor of the restroom, and at least half of the room lay beneath a wash of red. I touched my face. It seemed to take hours for me to register that there was blood on my hand. Where the hell did that come from? Hands bunched in my suit jacket, and I was dragged back to my feet. The bathroom mirror was shattered. That was where the blood on my face had come from. Anthony's father was dragging me off the floor. He had removed his suit jacket and button-down. He was wearing only a white undershirt with his dress pants. I could see the 2 8-pointed stars and the epaulets on his shoulders, the tips of the wings of Poland's white eagle peeking just above the neckline of his undershirt, the crowned head sitting directly beneath the jugular notch of his clavicle. Anthony Jr. had the same tattoo, the same plain black line work, stretched across the whole of his wide upper back, the top of the crown lying just at the base of his cervical spine. The senior Anthony held me against the wall with his left hand pressed to my chest, and I nearly lost consciousness completely as my head snapped to the left and slammed into the paper towel dispenser, as his right fist crashed into my jaw. It whirred, and a length of red-spattered brown paper slid out of the mouth of it. My mouth filled with blood within seconds, and I gagged on it, only just managing to turn my head to the side before I spat out a mouthful of ichor and a molar. The man didn't seem to recognize the favor I'd done for him, because his fist sank into my stomach and I lost my breath entirely as I doubled over, only to be dragged upright again. I saw Anthony Sr.'s fist draw back once more, and I flinched as I waited for the next blow to land. "That's enough, Anthony," said a voice I didn't recognize. I groaned and blinked my eyes as I tried to clear the blood out of my vision. "It will never be enough, Vadim." There was a blond man standing there, dressed in a rather modest black suit, and Igor stood just behind him, turning the lock on the bathroom door. Vadim. Dima Pavelko. Real estate investor my ass. I was face to face in a small locked room with the Bakan and his Sovietnik, outnumbered 3-1. I was taller and heavier than both Dima and Igor, but Anthony Sr. was just my size, and he'd already gotten the drop on me. This wasn't proving to be my best day ever. "You're sure this is him?" Dima spoke to Igor, and he nodded. "He was there in the restaurant when it happened." The man hummed, adjusting his suit jacket. "And what?" Pavelko spoke to me now. "Chiellini sent you here to gloat?" I tried to speak. Instead, I choked as blood came rolling down my throat from my sinuses. My nose was broken. Vadim motioned to Anthony Sr. and the man released me. I stumbled over to the sink and coughed out the blood. I took a ragged gasp and turned the water on, filling my hands and then my mouth. I spat the bloody water into the sink. Look, I got no part in this. I'm here because I'm Becca's friend. I considered Anthony a friend. I mean, Igor, tell him. I used to hang out with you guys. We used to drink together on the beach, for Christ's sake. Igor only stared at me, not saying anything. And now you're working for the Italian, Vadim said solemnly. We have eyes on that street. We know you helped the butcher put our boys in bags. Do you know who they were? My nephews. Not nameless thugs. Not trash. Men with a family who do not even now have the privilege of burying their dead. Yeah, I know, but I ain't got no choice, man. I got a family too. I got a sister and grandparents, and God knows what happens to them if I don't do what Jimmy says. And where is your family? They are elsewhere, and you are here now. Anthony Sr. grabbed me again, flicked open a large pocket knife as he pinned my left hand to the wall by the wrist. Igor stepped around Vadim and reached up to cover my mouth with his hand. The blade sliced at the base of my ring finger. I screamed and at the same time tried my best to speak from behind the man muffling me. Maybe I tell him to take a finger, one for each of his sons. Maybe then we will be even. Oh, would you like to say something? Please don't do this, I blurted out, and Vadim scoffed. Wait! Just fucking wait! It was her! Bianchi! She killed them! Vadim rolled his eyes. You're not doing yourself any favors. I know who killed my nephews. I know all about Chiellini and his pet devil. But I know where she lives, and I know where she's going to be tonight. I'm taking her up to Sapphire's, just me. She's going to be alone, and if you want to catch her off guard, tonight's the night. Vadim hummed again, then tilted his head to Anthony Sr. The man let go of my wrist. He looked disappointed, to say the least. I grabbed for the paper towels, ripped them loose, and wrapped them tight around my bleeding finger. I could see the white of my knuckle underneath the blood. What is that address? I told him. The address was burned into my mind by this point. I'm picking her up at 10 p.m. I'll be driving Jimmy's car. Black Lexus. The three muttered between themselves, but I couldn't understand any of the words. Clean yourself up, Vadim said to me. There is no reason to scare the girl. I sank down to the floor. The tears came hot and fast, and they stung in the cuts on my face. I pulled my knees up to my chest and sobbed, cradling my injured hand against my chest. You shouldn't cry like that. It's embarrassing, came a voice from next to me. Fuck you, you dead asshole. Anthony Jr. gave a wet snort, his elbow balanced on his bent knee where he was seated on the floor beside me. No reason to be nasty. His voice bubbled from his chest like his lungs were full of water, lungs that weren't even there anymore. You been here this whole time? You couldn't have stepped in, given a guy a hand? Fresh out of hands, the corpse burbled with laughter, giving a toothless grin.